The Nightingale and the Glowworm. Get set. God is the creator of this entire universe. All his creations are special in their own beautiful ways. Do you think it is right for any creature to harm any other creation of God? Read the following poem that contains a message for all creatures to live harmoniously. A nightingale that all day long had cheered the village with his song, nor yet at eve his note suspended, nor yet, when eventide was ended, began to feel, as well he might, the keen demand of appetite, when looking eagerly around, he spied far off upon the ground a something shining in the dark, and knew the glowworm by his spark. So, stooping down from hawthorn top, he thought to put him in his crop. The worm, aware of his intent, harangued him thus right eloquent. "Did you admire my lamp," quoth he, "as much as I your minstrelsy, you would abhor to do me wrong, as much as I to spoil your song. For 'twas the self-same power divine taught you to sing, and me to shine, that you with music, I with light, might beautify and cheer the night." The songster heard his short oration, and warbling out his approbation, released him as my story tells, and found a supper somewhere else. Word meanings. Note a single musical sound of a particular length and pitch. Eventide, evening, old usage. Appetite, hunger, desire for food. Stooping, moving with your head and shoulders bent forward and downward. Hawthorn, a thorny bush with white or pink flowers and small dark berries. Crop, the lower portion of a bird's throat to store food. Harangued, spoke in a loud voice, eloquent, able to express your opinion well. Minstrelsy, singing. Abhor, hate to do something that according to you is morally wrong. Songster, singer, old usage, oration. A short speech, warbling, singing. Approbation, approval or agreement. The eccentric painter. Get set. You must have heard the famous saying, "Where there is a will, there is a way." Things which seem impossible to be achieved can be done with single-mindedness and dedication. Mahatma Gandhi is a living example of this. The great Italian painter Michelangelo also showed this quality. This story about Michelangelo shows you how he achieved one of his goals. 4 years had passed since Michelangelo's return from Florence, and Rome was beginning to bore him.
"You can't find faces in Rome,"
Michelangelo grumbled to Pope Julius.
"There is no character in the faces here. They all look alike." "And what do you see in my face?"
The Pope asked, almost in jest. Without even a pause, the artist replied,
"A burning candle."
It took a minute for Pope Julius to understand the barbed words.
"I think I know what you mean,"
he said finally with a smile.
"I am just one more candle that burns at the altar alongside those thousands others, right?"
Michelangelo was silent.
"Angelo,"
the Pope continued,
"for 4 whole years you've been looking for Judas. I can't believe that in this vast universe that the Lord has created, where no two faces look alike, you cannot find faces, cannot discover models, surely."
Before the Pope could finish, Michelangelo had walked out. Pope Julius looked pensively at the retreating back of his moody painter. 4 years ago, Pope Julius had commissioned Michelangelo for a special task, to paint frescoes of important events from the Bible on the walls and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in St. Peter's Basilica Now they were nearly done, only the Last Supper remained unfinished.
I don't want any unpleasantness at this stage.
The Pope murmured to himself. He had not forgotten the time when Michelangelo was carving the crucifixion in wood for the Church of the Holy Spirit, and he had come excitedly to Julius, saying he had found just the right model. The model was a dead man. The Pope remembered ruefully how the funeral had been held up for 12 hours. Bramante, the Pope thought now, yes, Bramante was a great painter too. He, unlike Michelangelo, proudly proclaimed that he conjured faces from his imagination. But even the Pope had to admit this. Bramante's faces looked as though they had emerged from a common mould. According to the Medici, all Bramante's characters bore a strong family resemblance. Pope Julius had no choice but to dismiss Bramante and approach Michelangelo. 4 years ago, Michelangelo had started painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He would lie for hours beneath the dome of the Sistine Chapel, staring at it and muttering to himself. In those lime-coated brick and mud walls, Angelo was searching for faces. The faces of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and Judas. He swore he could see their flesh and blood forms.
But their faces,
he mumbled.
Their faces are buried deep in the verses of the Bible. They elude me.
He groaned.
They continue to elude.
The Pope had begun to doubt Michelangelo's sanity. Once he had stood very close and overheard Michelangelo repeating passages from the Bible.
What exactly are you doing, Angelo?
The Pope had asked, curiously.
What?
Angelo had looked up, startled.
Oh, I am trying to unravel these verses. Maybe then I'll find the faces.
There was a hint of despair in Michelangelo's voice. The Pope understood Angelo's frustration. Julius remembered how during one of his inspections he had seen that Angelo had drawn several sketches of the angel Gabriel.
How did you see Gabriel?
He had asked.
He doesn't belong to this world either.
Angelo had looked up to meet the Pope's eyes.
I heard his voice in the Old Testament. Then you must have heard God's voice too.
The Pope had joked.
I heard his silence.
Angelo's words were terse, abrupt, but the Pope had known without the shadow of a doubt that he had chosen the right man for the task.
Eccentric.
He had told the Vatican Committee.
But he's the only one who can paint the Sistine Chapel.
Michelangelo had found Mary with the greatest of ease. It had happened long ago, the day he saw his mother carrying 2 pots of water strung from a bamboo stick on her shoulder. In her womb would have been like his mother. He remembered watching his mother with unblinking eyes as she warmed the water for his father's bath. Her face reflected the warmth of the roaring fire, flushed, burning like molten gold. Michelangelo had immediately retired to his study to sketch that face again and again. But that was a long, long time ago. Michelangelo remembered that they were living in Bologna then. He even remembered vividly the eatery at the corner of their street. It was his special haunt, his father's too. While his father sat eating inside, Michelangelo sat on a bench outside. He would buy hot peanuts from a nearby vendor, noticing how every time the man weighed them out, a few would fall to the ground. A naked urchin would scurry across the street, pick the nuts and give them to the vendor, quietly popping one into his mouth, 1 peanut, for every time he helped the peanut seller. Then he would wait for the next customer. The sight fascinated Angelo. He drew several sketches of the child. Many years later, while carving the Madonna of Bruges, he had used those sketches to make the little Jesus small and naked. Then the Pope had asked him to paint the frescoes for the Sistine Chapel. He had refused at first, telling the Pope point blank that he was a sculptor and not a painter. He later agreed to a meeting in Rome because it was the one creation that could ensure him a place in history. Not that immortality could be reason enough for Michelangelo. He had certain other immediate needs in this ephemeral life as well. Most of all, he needed money to buy marble. The Pope had promised him money, but he had never given it. When Michelangelo reminded him, he had asked testily.
Colors merge.
Michelangelo had retorted.
They lose their identity and mix with others, unlike marble.
4 years had sped past, ever since he had started work on the frescoes in the chapel. His sculpting had come to a standstill, and Angelo was as bored with colors as he was with Rome. He wanted to finish the painting, The Last Supper, but his imagination failed him each time it came to the face of Judas, the 13th disciple. He was an impossible face to conceive. Then one day Michelangelo found him, his Judas. There he was in that small, dingy eatery in Rome, a man with unusually bright, beady eyes. The man was brimming with restless energy, spitting here and there. When he talked, the words tumbled out fast like coins from a torn pocket. The man sidled up to Angelo asking for change for a florin and ended up sharing his food. Later, Michelangelo saw the beady-eyed man at it again. He was asking someone else for change for a florin. As Michelangelo watched the man, he realized that this was how the man tricked people for food. He would ask someone for change for a florin as an excuse for sharing their food. It was not difficult for Angelo to persuade the beady-eyed man to accompany him to the chapel. Michelangelo explained to the man that he wanted to use his face as a model for Judas.
It will make you immortal, I promise.
Michelangelo said solemnly as he lifted the sheets covering the walls and the ceiling. The man gaped, awestruck. He recovered enough to ask for a tidy sum. Michelangelo promptly agreed. From that day on, the man came regularly to sit for Michelangelo. One day, the man stood in Michelangelo's studio, browsing through a pile of old sketches. Suddenly, he paused at the picture of the urchin from Bologna.
Who is this child?
He asked.
He used to live in Bologna many years ago.
Michelangelo said.
I gave little Jesus the face of this child. Do you remember the child's name? Yes, Marsolini,
said Michelangelo. The man smiled. He rolled up his sleeve. There was a name tattooed on his arm. Marsolini.
I am that child.
The man said.
He whose face you are giving to Judas today.
Word meanings. Jest, speak in a joking way. Barbed, unpleasant. Judas, Jesus Christ's disciple, who betrayed him. Pensively, thoughtfully, commissioned, authorized to do a job. Frescoes, paintings on a moist plaster surface. Basilica, one of the main churches of Rome. Ruefully, sorrowfully, conjured, made. Medici, patrons of art in Florence. Elude, escape the understanding of sanity, soundness of mind. Unravel, understand the hidden meaning. Terse, brief, short. Eccentric, having unusual or odd personality. Vividly, clearly, haunt, place visited frequently. Urchin, small mischievous boy. Scurry, move quickly. Ephemeral, existing or popular only for a short time. Testily, angrily or irritably. Conceive, form an idea. Dingy, dark, shabby. Brimming, full to the brim. Sidled, moved sideways. Florin, former gold coin of Florence. Tidy sum, a lot of money. Browsing, inspecting something leisurely and casually. My grandmother. Get set. Do you enjoy visiting your grandparents during vacations? Grandparents are very loving towards their grandchildren. But sometimes they neither appreciate nor realize their grandparents' love. In the following story, let's read how the feelings of a grandchild towards his grandmother change as he begins to understand her. A battalion of us cousins would gather at Archie's old mansion every holiday. Archie would strut around, warning me against mischief, while she petted Uncle Dee's children. They would be showered with words of praise and endearment, while I would sulk, unnoticed, in silent envy. Archie lived alone in her big mansion at the top of a hill. When Sia died after a long illness, Archie wailed, but I was never sure whether she was really sad. I watched her closely and saw that her eyes were dry. She just wailed loudly. After that, Archie lived all by herself in that old mansion. When we went there to pay our respects to her on Avuruthu, she gave us pocket money. We looked forward to receiving money from her. My elder siblings always got more money than I did because they were older. When I played hide-and-seek with Uncle Dee's children, Archie would always give away my most secret hiding places. Or did I just think she did? I was a jealous child, and I was sure that Archie liked Uncle Dee's children better than she liked me and my siblings. So I did not like Archie much either. She usually wore an enormous floral dressing gown with gigantic sunflowers on it. She had a cache of sweets which she kept hidden in her kitchen. I would venture on a sweet hunt when her loud snores told me that she was well into her long afternoon nap. Finding the right containers was difficult, but I always tried. When we, my two sisters, my brother, Amma and I, would visit her, she usually asked how we were doing in school. We would fidget uncomfortably and mumble replies, only waiting for our sweets. In her floral dressing gown, Archie would sail away to the kitchen to bring us sweets, ginger biscuits, and hot ginger tea. The ginger biscuits were always rationed, and she only gave us 2 each at a time. On the days that she thought I had behaved really well, she gave me 3 biscuits and even ruffled my hair like Amma did. Sometimes, after one of Uncle G's rare visits from Australia, she would give us Australian chocolates. I thought Archie was always spying on me. I rarely did anything wrong, well, except the sweet hunt. But I think Archie was never happy with me. I remember overhearing her telling Amma that I didn't know how to behave with visitors and that I was too loud and boisterous. On Avuruthu, we had to bow at Archie's feet with betel leaves before she gave us pocket money. Last New Year, when I paid my respects, I refused to touch her feet because I thought they were dirty. I think she was hurt. She said it was all right, but her voice was unsteady. Then one day it all happened. That Sunday, Amma was in the kitchen getting ready to cook lunch. Uncle D, Amma's youngest brother, came to our house. He entered with a worried look on his face. He didn't even knock. He just walked into the house and straight into the kitchen. I was doing my homework by the fish tank. Uncle D told Amma that Archie was very ill. Amma turned the stove off, and I watched as the flame turned blue before it died. "We have to go and see Archie at once," she said. I was surprised because Archie was quite well when I last saw her. Uncle D said that Archie had gone for her usual walk in the garden. On returning, she had developed a severe chill and a high-raging fever. We immediately got ready and headed towards that familiar old mansion. Walking up the hill, all I could think of was how we cousins would gather there around her on Sundays and how she would give us treats at tea time. We hurried up the hill, passing the bakery where Amma would always buy us Kimbula bunnies. This time Amma didn't stop. When we arrived at the house, there were quite a few people there already. We went straight into Archie's bedroom and she lay on her bed, her face lined with pain. Sitting quietly at her bedside, I let my eyes wander around her room. I rarely came in here, preferring the garden and other rooms to escape Archie's stern vigilance. On the wall above the bed was a framed photograph of Archie, taken during her youth. The woman in the picture with her slim figure and dark hair did not look like the Archie I knew. What made the woman in the picture even more unrecognizable to me was her beautiful smile. It was rarely that I had seen Archie smile. Then I immediately looked at Amma's face. Amma smiled like that, and she was just as slim. Amma looked just like Archie in that photograph. I wondered why I hadn't noticed the photograph before. I looked at Archie's silver hair on the pillow and wondered, for the first time, what it must be like to live in that big old mansion all alone. Sitting there, I thought about Rocky. About 5 years ago, Archie had a dog she called Rocky. He was her constant companion. I remember how he used to bark at anybody who tried to pet him. He allowed only Archie to pet his head. Archie always kept dog biscuits in a special container for Rocky. Whenever Rocky did a trick, Archie always gave him a biscuit, and Rocky would wag his tail. When did Rocky die? Did Archie miss him? I had never thought of asking Archie. All my aunts, Amma's sisters, were around Archie's bed. Their faces bore the signs of deep grief and showed the fear of loss. I could see how much Archie meant to them. I knew then that there was something about Archie that I didn't know. I wasn't even born 10 years ago. Maybe Archie had been different then, kinder and more loving. For a moment I felt sorry for Archie, lying ill in that big old mansion all by herself. I wondered what she might have thought when she was finding it difficult to breathe. Uncle D had told us that. I wondered if she cried. I remembered that one time when Archie had affectionately ruffled my hair when I had got all A's in the annual examination. I must have looked sad when we were leaving because Manal Auntie asked me if I was feeling well. I was fine, but I was sadder than I had expected. That night, Amma made us hot ginger tea, like Archie always did. We sat around the big dining table in the living room and drank the ginger tea quietly and thoughtfully. Amma looked worried, but she kept telling us that Archie was going to be well soon. I really hoped she was, because the new year was just round the corner, and this time I was ready to touch her feet. Word meanings: battalion, a large group. Archie, grandmother. Strut, walk proudly. Sia, grandfather. Avarudhu, New Year festival in Sri Lanka. Cache, hidden store. Venture, to go somewhere that could be dangerous. Fidget, move nervously. Rationed, given in fixed quantity. Boisterous, loud, noisy and lively. Beetle, pan. Kimbula bunnies, sweet buns. Vigilance, alert, watchfulness. The hero. Get set. It is every boy's dream to do a heroic deed so that the world could acknowledge his bravery and courage. But does everyone get a chance to do it? Read this poem about a young boy who imagines doing a brave, heroic deed for his mother.
Mother, let us imagine we are traveling and passing through a strange and dangerous country. You are riding in a palanquin, and I am trotting by you on the red horse. It is evening, and the sun goes down. The waste of Joradegi lies wan and grey before us. The land is desolate and barren. You are frightened and thinking, I know not where we have come to. I say to you, Mother, do not be afraid. The meadow is prickly with spiky grass, and through it runs a narrow broken path. There are no cattle to be seen in the wide field. They have gone to their village stalls. It grows dark and dim on the land and sky, and we cannot tell where we are going. Suddenly, you call me and ask me in a whisper, "What light is that near the bank?" Just then there bursts out a fearful yell, and figures come running towards us. You sit crouched in your palanquin and repeat the name of the gods in prayer. The bearers, shaking in terror, hide themselves in the thorny bush. I shout to you, "Don't be afraid, mother, I am here." With long sticks in their hands and hair all wild about their heads, they come nearer and nearer. I shout, "Have a care, you villains! One step more and you are dead men." They give another terrible yell and rush forward. You clutch my hand and say, "Dear boy, for heaven's sake, keep away from them." I say, "Mother, just you watch me." Then I spur my horse for a wild gallop, and my sword and buckler clash against each other. The fight becomes so fearful, mother, that it would give you a cold shudder. Could you see it from your palanquin? Many of them fly, and a great number are cut to pieces. I know you are thinking, sitting all by yourself, that your boy must be dead by this time. But I come to you all stained with blood, and say, "Mother, the fight is over now." You come out and kiss me, pressing me to your heart, and you say to yourself, "I don't know what I should do if I hadn't my boy to escort me." 1,000 useless things happen day after day, and why couldn't such a thing come true by chance? It would be like a story in a book. My brother would say, "Is it possible? I always thought he was so delicate." Our village people would all say in amazement, "Was it not lucky that the boy was with his mother?"
Word meanings. Palanquin. A covered carriage like a box carried on 2 horizontal poles by 4 bearers, trotting, moving at a quick steady pace. Wan, dull and gloomy, desolate, abandoned. Buckler, a round shield held for protection. Escort, to take someone somewhere, especially when you are protecting or guarding them. The hero. Get set. It is every boy's dream to do a heroic deed so that the world could acknowledge his bravery and courage. But does everyone get a chance to do it? Read this poem about a young boy who imagines doing a brave, heroic deed for his mother.
Mother, let us imagine we are traveling and passing through a strange and dangerous country. You are riding in a palanquin, and I am trotting by you on the red horse. It is evening, and the sun goes down. The waste of Joradegi lies wan and grey before us. The land is desolate and barren. You are frightened and thinking, "I know not where we have come to." I say to you, "Mother, do not be afraid." The meadow is prickly with spiky grass, and through it runs a narrow broken path. There are no cattle to be seen in the wide field. They have gone to their village stalls. It grows dark and dim on the land and sky, and we cannot tell where we are going. Suddenly, you call me and ask me in a whisper, "What light is that near the bank?" Just then there bursts out a fearful yell, and figures come running towards us. You sit crouched in your palanquin and repeat the name of the gods in prayer. The bearers, shaking in terror, hide themselves in the thorny bush. I shout to you, "Don't be afraid, mother, I am here." With long sticks in their hands and hair all wild about their heads, they come nearer and nearer. I shout, "Have a care, you villains! One step more and you are dead men." They give another terrible yell and rush forward. You clutch my hand and say, "Dear boy, for heaven's sake, keep away from them." I say, "Mother, just you watch me." Then I spur my horse for a wild gallop, and my sword and buckler clash against each other. The fight becomes so fearful, mother, that it would give you a cold shudder. Could you see it from your palanquin? Many of them fly, and a great number are cut to pieces. I know you are thinking, sitting all by yourself, that your boy must be dead by this time. But I come to you all stained with blood, and say, "Mother, the fight is over now." You come out and kiss me, pressing me to your heart, and you say to yourself, "I don't know what I should do if I hadn't my boy to escort me." 1,000 useless things happen day after day, and why couldn't such a thing come true by chance? It would be like a story in a book. My brother would say, "Is it possible? I always thought he was so delicate." Our village people would all say in amazement, "Was it not lucky that the boy was with his mother?"
Word meanings. Palanquin. A covered carriage like a box carried on 2 horizontal poles by 4 bearers, trotting, moving at a quick steady pace. Wan, dull and gloomy, desolate, abandoned. Buckler. A round shield held for protection. Escort. To take someone somewhere, especially when you are protecting or guarding them. A horse and 2 goats. Get set. Do you get irritated when your English or Hindi teacher asks you to improve your language? This is because language is a system of communication used by a particular country or community. How would you communicate with a person whose language is different and both of you do not know each other's language? Read this story in which R.K. Narayan humorously shows how 2 people communicate positively without knowing each other's language. Kritham was probably one of the tiniest villages in India. The village consisted of less than 30 houses, only one of which was built with brick and cement. The other houses, distributed in 4 streets, were generally made of bamboo, thatch, straw and mud. Muni's was the last house on the 4th street. In his prosperous days, Muni had owned a flock of 40 sheep and goats. But he had gradually become poorer. From a flock of 40, which he drove into a pen at night, his stock had now come down to only 2 goats. One day, he set out of the village urging and bullying the goats until they meandered along the foot of the horse statue at the edge of the village. He sat on the pedestal of the statue for the rest of the day. The advantage of this was that he could watch the highway and see the lorries and buses pass through to the hills. The horse was nearly life-sized, moulded out of clay, baked, burnt, and brightly coloured. It reared its head proudly, prancing with its 4 legs in the air and flourishing its tail in a loop. Sitting on the pedestal, Muni noticed a vehicle coming down the road at full speed. While he observed the yellow vehicle coming down, he wondered how to describe it later to his wife. The vehicle sputtered and stopped in front of him. A foreigner who had been driving it got down and came towards him.
"Excuse me, is there a gas station nearby, or do I have to wait until another car comes?"
He suddenly looked up at the clay horse and cried,
"Marvelous!"
without completing his sentence. The foreigner wore modern clothes. Muni said to himself,
"What does this man want from me? I do not understand what he speaks. O Lord, protect me. I don't know why this man should be after me."
Meanwhile, the foreigner cried again.
"Marvelous!"
Nodding his head, he paced around the statue with his eyes fixed on it. He suddenly pressed his palms together in a salute, smiled and said,
"Namaste. How do you do?"
At which Muni spoke the only English expressions he had learned.
Yes, no.
Having exhausted his English vocabulary, he said,
"My name is Muni."
The man took out a wallet from his pocket and presented his card. He said,
"I have come from New York."
Muni felt he could only ward off trouble by talk, so he went on, all in chaste Tamil, for which Kritham was famous. The foreigner nodded his head and listened courteously, though he understood nothing.
"I'm sure you know when this horse was made,"
said the man and smiled. Muni pleaded.
"Please go away, sir. I know nothing."
Now the foreigner implored.
Please, please, I will speak slowly. Please try to understand me."
Muni tried to edge out, saying,
"Must go home,"
and turned to go. The stranger almost pinioned Muni's back to the statue and asked,
"Isn't this statue yours? Why don't you sell it to me?"
Muni, now comforted that the subject was the horse, said,
"This is our guardian."
The foreigner now thought by the tone of the other that a question was being asked and said,
"How am I transporting it? I can push the seat back and make room in the rear. The van can take in an elephant,"
waving all the while at the back of the seat. Then he added,
"I am not a millionaire, but a modest businessman. My trade is coffee."
Muni now felt encouraged to ask,
"How many children have you?"
Realizing that a question was being asked, the man replied,
"I said 100.
which encouraged Muni to go into details.
"How many of your children are boys and how many girls? Where are they?"
In answer to these questions, the man dashed his hand into his pocket and brought forth his wallet. He brought out 100-rupee currency note and said,
"Well, this is what I meant."
The old man now realized that money was entering their talk. His eyes travelled to his goats, nosing about, trying to nibble at minute greenery, peeping out of rock and dry earth. Now the truth dawned on the old man. His dream of a lifetime was about to be realized. He understood that the man was actually making an offer for the goats. The man shook his hand and presented before him 100 rupees, suddenly realizing that this was what the old man was asking.
"It is all for you, or you may share it if you have a partner."
The old man took the money at the drop of a hat and pointed at the station wagon and asked,
"Are you carrying them off in that?" "Yes, of course,"
said the other, understanding the transportation part of it. When a truck came downhill, he stopped it and got the help of a couple of men to detach the horse from its pedestal and place it in the station wagon. Glad that he had sailed through it, Muni hurried homeward with the cash securely tucked away at his waist in his dhoti. He shut the street door and stole up softly to his wife. He then displayed his fortune for the day. Muni's wife snatched the note from him, observed it by the glow of the fire, and cried,
100 rupees? How did you come by it? Have you been stealing? I have sold our goats to a foreigner. He was absolutely crazy to have them. Gave me all this money and carried them off in his motor car.
Hardly had these words left his lips when they heard bleating outside. She opened the door.
Here they are,
she said.
What is the meaning of all this?
He muttered a great curse and seized one of the goats by its ears and shouted,
"Where is that man? Don't you know you are his? Why did you come back? For me you are now dead wood."
His wife glared at him and declared,
"If you have thieves, the police will come tonight and break your bones. Don't involve me. I will go to my parents."
Word meanings: meandered, followed a zigzag or winding course aimlessly. Pedestal, support or base for a statue. Reared, raised to an upright position. Prancing, moving by, springing. Flourishing, moving vigorously. Sputtered, made short explosive sounds. Gas station, petrol station. Exhausted, used up completely. Chaste, pure in style. Implored, pleaded urgently. Pinioned, pushed against, modest. Limited or moderate. Minute, extremely small. Dawned, if a feeling or idea dawns, you have it for the first time. The wonder drug. Get set. Can you imagine medication without antibiotics these days? Before antibiotics were discovered, people would die even of small fevers or cuts. Let's read a story about an absent-minded scientist who discovered a wonder drug.
What does your doctor prescribe when you are down with fever? Or if you cut yourself badly? Have you ever been told to take antibiotics? Various antibiotics are used to treat a number of diseases and to prevent the onset of infections when our skin, the first barrier to disease, is somehow broken through a simple cut or a serious wound. Today, we take antibiotics for granted, but they are a relatively recent discovery. Penicillin was the first antibiotic, which was not available until the early 1940s. The discovery of penicillin gave doctors new ammunition to fight diseases. Before its discovery, minor wounds that became infected or trivial injuries could lead to death. There is a famous story about how penicillin was discovered by Alexander Fleming at St. Mary's Hospital, London. Fleming had a bit of reputation as an absent-minded scientist. Cultures that he worked on were constantly forgotten in his laboratory, which was normally in a state of great disorder. Returning from a month-long vacation in 1928, Fleming noticed that many of his culture plates were contaminated with a fungus which was a species of penicillium. Although the species of the mold was unknown to Fleming at the time, he observed that it was inhibiting the growth of bacteria. Fleming realized that this could be something important and continued to study the antibacterial properties of the mold. Finally, he isolated an extract from the mold and named it penicillin. It was certainly a historic moment, but the story does not begin or end there. To understand the importance of Fleming's discovery, we have to go back to the late 19th century when Louis Pasteur discovered that many diseases were caused by microorganisms. This resulted in a determined effort by scientists who searched for ways to destroy these microorganisms without harming the person who was infected. While the scientists were carrying out their experiments in this field, they often found that their bacterial cultures in the laboratory had been contaminated by other microorganisms, especially fungi. Thus, before Fleming, other scientists had also observed a chance contamination in bacterial culture. But their only response was to think that it had ruined their experiment, and they discarded the cultures and thought nothing more about it. Fleming, on the other hand, followed up on his observation, and that was where the difference lay. However, even after his discovery was published, not much attention was paid to it. Fleming did not become famous overnight, and there were, in fact, many people who doubted that his discovery would be of any value. Initially, Fleming was unable to prove that it had any therapeutic value, and he began to doubt his own research. But as further tests continued, he began to realize that penicillin was extremely powerful as an antibacterial compound. His extracts could be diluted 1,000 times and still be effective in killing bacteria. Further tests were done to conclude that penicillin was non-toxic. These results were again very interesting. But how could they be translated to practical use? It was not Fleming, but one of his former students, Dr. Cecil Payne, who was the first to demonstrate the value of penicillin in medicine. Payne's first effort at using penicillin was in treating patients with psychosis barbae. This proved to be a failure, but did not dampen his enthusiasm to continue working with penicillin. His next attempt at using penicillin was made while treating the lacerated eye of a miner. There was a strong embedded in the infected eye, and normally the eye would have to be removed. However, after Payne applied the penicillin extract, the miner's eye and eyesight were saved. It was a dramatic success. But Payne did not make his success public. By the mid-1930s, several new discoveries in medicine took place and made Fleming wonder whether he should continue his work with penicillin. A class of synthetic chemical drugs called sulfa drugs was developed in Germany and was effective in treating some bacterial infections. Another synthetic drug was effective against pneumonia. Fleming now began working with these new drugs, though he had stopped working with penicillin by 1934. He did not lose his interest. Other scientists became interested in penicillin around this time. Dr. Howard Walter Florey was the foremost among them. Florey, however, did not work alone. He had a team that included Dr. Ernst Boris Chain, another scientist who would become famous in the process of developing penicillin. Florey also had the advantage of working with a well-staffed and equipped lab, which Fleming did not have. The first real test for the Florey lab came when Albert Alexander, a 48-year-old London policeman, cut himself while shaving. The cut was ignored for several days and became septic. Alexander was taken to hospital and given sulfa drugs, but without success. When the doctors believed that he was going to die within a few hours, Florey and Chain requested that they be given permission to treat the patient. This would be their first human subject to whom penicillin was applied. The two scientists administered the injections themselves. After 5 days, Alexander was recovering, but then there was no more penicillin available. The policeman had a relapse and died 5 days later. However, the experiment did demonstrate that penicillin was not harmful to humans. In fact, it was effective. The scientists were more successful with these next patients. Around the same time, Fleming was also treating a patient with penicillin, but the shortage of penicillin kept hindering the treatment. By 1941, it was acknowledged that penicillin was indeed a worthwhile drug and could save thousands of lives. With the number of injuries and related diseases increasing during the Second World War, the demand for penicillin was greater than before. Scientists started researching ways and means to boost the production of penicillin to match the demand. During this period, when mass production of penicillin was being perfected, Fleming had little to do with it. He was almost forgotten as the discoverer of penicillin by the time it was being produced in large quantities. However, he was rescued from oblivion in 1943, when he was knighted along with Howard Florey. 2 years later, Fleming, Florey and Chain were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for their discovery and development of penicillin. One illness after another was cured by penicillin, which was by this time called a wonder drug. Before its discovery, the major causes of death in hospitals during the war were pneumonia, blood poisoning, scarlet fever, diphtheria, tonsillitis, rheumatic fever, and many other diseases. All of these were successfully treated with penicillin. The discovery of penicillin brought about one of the biggest searches in medical history. It was reasoned that if there was one antibiotic in nature, there must be many more, and many more mold indeed be found later. However, few would be fungal in origin. Most of them would be derived from bacteria. Yet, without the discovery of penicillin, all these other antibiotics would possibly never have been discovered.
Word meanings. Antibiotics, medicines that kill germs in our body. Ammunition, here, an important information to fight against something. Trivial, not important. Reputation, opinion of people about a person or thing. Cultures, a group of cells grown for scientific study. Contaminated, made impure. Species, a group of plants or animals belonging to the same group. Penicillium, a type of fungus. Inhibiting, stopping or decreasing. Mold, any fungi. Isolated, set apart. Microorganisms, very small organisms that can only be seen using a microscope. Ruined, destroyed. Therapeutic, related to the treatment of disease. Demonstrate, show with evidence. Lacerated, having edges that are torn. Synthetic, made artificially. Foremost, first in time, place, rank. Equipped, provided with equipment. Septic, full of pus and bacteria. Administered, gave or applied. Worthwhile, sufficiently valuable to justify time or effort spent. Oblivion, condition of being forgotten. The refugee. Get set. Would you like traveling to a different city because of some unusual circumstances in your city? How would you feel? Think of all the positive and negative feelings of such a journey. This story takes us through the experiences of refugees who have been forced to leave their country and live in another one. The city was full of refugees, many thousands of them, fed and clothed somehow, sheltered in mats in great camps outside the city wall. At any hour of the day, lines of ragged men and women and a few children could be seen making their way towards the camps. If any city dweller noticed them, he would think with increased anger, more refugees.
Will there never be an end to them? We will all starve trying to feed them even a little.
This anger, which is born out of fear, made small shopkeepers bawl out rudely to the many beggars who came to beg at the doors. It made men ruthless in paying small fares to the rickshaw pullers, of whom there were 10 times more than needed, because the refugees were trying to earn something. The usual rickshaw pullers cursed the refugees because they would pull for anything given to them, thereby bringing down fares, and everyone suffered. The city was full of refugees, begging at every door, getting into every unskilled trade and service. Many lay dead on the streets at every frozen dawn. A fresh horde was coming in now at twilight of a winter day, but these were no common men and women, no riffraff, from some community, always poor and easily starving at the time of floods. No, these were men and women of whom any nation might have been proud. It could be seen they were all from one region, for they wore garments woven out of the same dark blue cotton stuff. The garments were plain and cut in an old-fashioned way, the sleeves long and the coats long and full. The men wore smocked aprons, the smocking done in curious, intricate, beautiful designs. The women had bands of the same plain blue stuff wrapped like kerchiefs about their heads. Both men and women were tall and strong. Each of them carried a load of 2 baskets slung on a pole across their shoulder. In these baskets were clothes and quilts made of the blue cotton stuff and padded. Clothing and bedding were clean and strongly made. In both the baskets, on top of every folded quilt, with a bit of mat between, was an iron cauldron. These cauldrons doubtlessly must have been taken from the earthen of the village when the people saw the time had come for them to move. But in no basket was there a vestige of food, nor was there a trace of food having been cooked in them recently. This lack of food was confirmed when one looked closely into the faces of the people. At first glance, in the twilight, they seemed healthy enough, but when one looked more closely, one saw they were the faces of starving people in despair. They saw nothing of the strange sights of a new city, because they were too near to death to see anything. No new sight could move their curiosity. They were men and women who had stayed by their land until starvation drove them out. Thus they passed unseen, silent, and alien. One of this long procession of silent men and women was a little, wizened old man. Even he carried a load of 2 baskets. In one basket there was the quilt, with a cauldron on it, while in the other basket there was only the quilt, but no cauldron. Suddenly he could go no more. He set the burden down with great gentleness, and sank upon the ground. His head was sunk between his knees, his eyes were closed, and he was panting desperately. Starved as he was, a little blood rose in dark patches on his cheeks. A ragged vendor selling hot noodles set his stand near and shouted his trade cry, and the light from the stand fell on the old man's drooping figure. A man passing by stopped and muttered, looking at him,
I swear I can give no more this day if I am to feed my own even nothing but noodles. But here is this old man. Well, I will give him the bit of silver I earned today and trust tomorrow again. If my own old father had been alive, I would have given it to him.
He fumbled in his clothes and brought out of his ragged girdle a bit of a silver coin, and after a moment's hesitation and muttering, he added to it a copper penny.
There, old father,
he said, with a sort of bitter heartiness.
Let me see you eat noodles.
The old man lifted his head slowly. When he saw the silver, he would not put out his hand. He said,
Sir, I did not beg of you. Sir, we have good land and we have never been starving like this before. But this year, the people have eaten their seeds. I told them we should not eat the seeds, but they were young and hungry, and they ate them.
Take it, said the man, and he dropped the money into the old man's smocked apron and went on his way, sighing. The vendor prepared his bowl of noodles and called out,
How many bowls will you eat, old man?
Then the old man stirred. He felt eagerly in his apron, and when he saw the 2 coins there, one copper and the other silver, he said,
Old man, one small bowl is enough. Can you eat only one small bowl then?
Asked the vendor, astonished. But being a simple man, he said no more, but prepared the bowl. And when it was finished, he called out,
Here it is.
And he waited to see who would eat it. Then the old man rose with a great effort. He took the bowl between his shaking hands and went to the other basket. There, while the vendor watched, the old man pulled aside the quilt until one could see the shrunken face of a small boy lying with his eyes closed. When the old man lifted the boy's head so that his mouth could touch the edge of the little bowl, he began to swallow feebly until the hot mixture was finished. The old man kept murmuring to him,
There, my heart, there, my child. Your grandson?
Said the vendor.
Yes,
said the old man.
The son of my only son. Both my son and his wife drowned while working on our land when the dikes broke.
He covered the child tenderly, and then squatting on his haunches, he ran his tongue carefully around the little bowl and removed the last trace of food. Then, as though he had been fed, he handed the bowl back to the vendor.
"But you have the silver bit,"
cried the vendor, yet more astonished, when he saw the old man ordered no more. The old man shook his head.
"That is for seeds,"
he replied.
"As soon as I saw it, I knew I would buy seeds with it. They ate up all the seeds, and with what shall the land be sown again? If I were not so poor myself,"
said the vendor,
"I might even have given you a bowl. But to give to a man who has a bit of silver—"
He shook his head, puzzled.
"I do not ask you, brother,"
said the old man.
"Well, I know you cannot understand, but if you had land, you would know it must be put to seed again, or there will be starvation yet another year. The best I can do for this grandson of mine is to buy a little seed for the land. Yes, even though I die and others plant it, the land must be put to seed."
He took up his load again, his legs trembling, and straining his eyes down the long straight street, he staggered on. Word meanings: refugees, people who leave their country during war, famine, etc. Bawl, shout loudly, ruthless, cruel, without pity. Horde, large group. Smocked, stitched loosely. Intricate, difficult to understand. Cauldron, a large boiler. Vestige, small part. Alien, belonging to another area. Wizened, withered. Bumbled, searched clumsily. Girdle, belt. Heartiness, affection and cheerfulness. Dikes, earth collected to hold back the waters of a sea or river. Skimble shanks, the railway cat. Get set. We keep dogs as pets to ensure our safety. They guard against strangers and thieves. But can you imagine an animal guarding a train like a policeman? Read this unusual and interesting poem about a special cat who guards a night mail during its journey. There's a whisper down the line at 11:39, when the night mail's ready to depart, saying, "Skimble, where is Skimble? Has he gone to hunt the thimble? We must find him, or the train can't start." All the guards and all the porters and the station master's daughters, they are searching high and low, saying, "Skimble, where is Skimble? For unless he's very nimble, then the night mail just can't go." At 11:42, when the signal's nearly due, and the passengers are frantic to a man, then Skimble will appear, and he'll saunter to the rear. He has been busy in the luggage van. He gives one flash of his glass green eyes, and the signal goes, all clear. And we're off at last for the northern part of the northern hemisphere. You may say that by and large it is Skimble who's in charge of the sleeping car express. From the driver and the guards to the bagmen playing cards, he will supervise them all more or less. Down the corridor he paces and examines all the faces of the travellers in the first and in the third. He establishes control by a regular patrol, and he'll know at once if anything occurred. He will watch you without winking, and he sees what you are thinking, and it's certain that he doesn't approve of hilarity and riot, so the folk are very quiet when Skimble is about and on the move. You can play no pranks with Skimble Shanks. He is a cat that cannot be ignored. So nothing goes wrong on the Northern Mail when Skimble Shanks is aboard. Oh, it's very pleasant when you have found your little den, with your name written up on the door, and the berth is very neat, with a newly folded sheet, and there's not a speck of dust on the floor. There is every sort of light. You can make it dark or bright. There's a button that you turn to make a breeze. There's a funny little basin you're supposed to wash your face in, and a crank to shut the window if you sneeze. Then the guard looks in politely and will ask you very brightly, "Do you like your morning tea weak or strong?" But Skimble's just behind him and was ready to remind him, for Skimble won't let anything go wrong. And when you creep into your cozy berth and pull up the counterpane, you are bound to admit that it's very nice to know that you won't be bothered by mice. You can leave all that to the railway cat, the cat of the railway train. In the watches of the night, he is always fresh and bright. Every now and then he has a cup of tea, with perhaps a drop of scotch, while he's keeping on the watch, only stopping here and there to catch a flea. You were fast asleep at Crewe, and so you never knew that he was walking up and down the station. You were sleeping all the while. He was busy at Carlisle, where he greets the station master with elation. But you saw him at Dumfries, when he summons the police, if there's anything they ought to know about. When you get to Gallowgate, there you do not have to wait, for Skimbleshanks will help you to get out. He gives you a wave of his long brown tail, which says, "I'll see you again." You'll meet without fail on the midnight mail, the cat of the railway train. Word meanings: nimble, able to move quickly and easily with light, neat movements. Saunter, walk leisurely. Bagman, travelling salesman. Patrol, move to maintain order and security. Hilarity, loud merriment. Riot, noisy disorder caused by a group. Crank, a lever to open or close something. Counterpane, cover for a bed, elation, feeling of joy. The observant jeweler. Get set. Normally, when a robbery takes place, the police and detectives are called, but sometimes alertness and sharpness of the mind and the power to observe can solve robbery cases without the police. Read this story about a person working at a jewelry store who succeeds in preventing a robbery because of being observant. My name is Partha Sengupta. I am an observant man. I look at people, notice things about them and wonder who they are. I watch what they are doing and wonder why they are doing it. I work at Gangaram Jewelers. They sell antique jewelry. The shop is quite small. It has a long counter at which I show and sell things. Mr. Gangaram has his office in a little room behind the shop. There are only 2 assistants, Miss Rupa and I. The first thing I do in the morning is to put some pieces of jewelry in the window. They are always taken out at night. On this morning of the great event, I noticed a girl looking in at a shop window just opposite. It was the shop of an undertaker, so there was nothing in the window except 2 of those containers in which the ashes of a dead person are put, and some photographs of gravestones. The girl had a long coat and no hat. She was wearing shoes with low heels. She might have been an artist, but not a very good one. I watched the girl for some time. Then a man came into a shop. His clothes were dull and sober, except for a very bright necktie. He was about 35 years old. He was constantly chewing gum. He asked to see some rings. I brought out a tray of rings. He picked up 2 or 3 and asked the price. I noticed he was left-handed. There was one very beautiful ring, with diamonds and large, deep red rubies set in the shape of a flower. The man seemed to think the price was too high. There were 3 trays of rings on the counter, and he still could not decide what he wanted. Then he saw the 4th tray. It was in the safe in which all the things are locked up at night. I turned to get it out, but before I put it on the counter, I saw that the diamond and ruby flower ring had gone. I put down the tray and asked Miss Rupa to come. She came and stood beside me. I said,
You have decided on the flower ring, have you, sir? If you'll give it to me, I'll find a box for it. The man said, I haven't decided on anything.
Miss Rupa went to fetch Mr. Gangaram. The unpredictable month. Get set. We all have our favorite months of the year. Which is your favorite month? Read this story in which the writer describes his feelings, experiences, sights and sounds of his favorite month. March is an unpredictable month. One day can be as cold as any in winter, the next as warm as any in spring. It may be as dry as a desert one morning, and by sundown as wet as a monsoon night. Fresh falls of snow in the mountains of Kashmir or Himachal bring chilly winds to the capital. Strong winds push clouds up to freezing heights, convert raindrops into ice, toss islets up over and over again till they are too heavy to bear and let them descend on the earth as hail. Take a close look at a hailstone and you will notice that it is of a milky white color and consists of layers of ice like skins on an onion. I used to wonder why hailstorms did not occur in winter months when it is cold, but in spring or early summers when it is warm. Now I know it takes strong winds to make hail. I have often put away my woolens by the middle of the month and taken out my summer clothes, only to put back the cottons and once again get out cardigans and warm socks. What they say about May in England can be said of March in India. Never cast a clout till March be out. The sun also continues to behave erratically. It comes up earlier by more minutes than it goes down in the evenings. Humans are not the only ones to be fooled by the weather. Insects, said to be endowed with an extra sense of forecasting the weather, suffer heavy losses. Mosquitoes, flies and moths, which come out of hiding to pester humans, suddenly find the weather turn inclement and are frozen to death. In my diary I record the first time I hear crickets chirp. This is usually in the second week of March, probably somewhat earlier in my apartment than in other homes, as I have a log fire burning every winter night. A cricket's chirp can be a reliable substitute for a thermometer. The hotter it is, the faster the cricket chirps. If you do not believe me, try the following experiment. Count the number of chirps per minute. Divide the total by 4 and add 40. The total will give you the temperature of the room in Fahrenheit. The vagaries of the weather make Holi, the festival of colors, a chancy affair. It usually falls sometime between the latter part of February and the end of March. Some years only the young are out with their long tube syringes, buckets of colored water and red powder to fight mock battles, yelling, "Holi hai! Holi hai!" Other years it is warm enough for the middle-aged and the old to risk being doused. By mid-March, the mulberry tree, shahatut in Hindi, Morus alba in Latin, for the white-fruited variety, has both flowers and leaves. For a few days its caterpillar-like fruits are free to all for picking. Bauhinias are still in flower, though now with leaves around them. Mango trees are covered with a powdery cluster of blossoms. In March, both birth and death are much in evidence. On the one hand, you can see that grapevine and madhumalati, quiscalis, meaning who, what. Indica, a name given to it by a Dutch botanist because of its eccentric manner of growth. Add new leaves every day. On the other, neems, mahuas, jamuns, peepals and banyans are shedding their foliage. Of the dying and the reborn, peepals and banyans have the most delicate of new leaves, pale pink, silky soft and beautifully shaped. If you want an offering from nature as your bookmark, you cannot do better than press their leaves in your album. Most birds start making their nests in March. Vultures and kites, which started off earlier, are busy making nests. For some years I have watched a couple of white-backed vultures. I presume they are the same every year. Choose the same cleft in the branches of the ailanthus, overlooking the golf club swimming pool. This tree is common in Delhi. Its Latin name, ailanthus, tree of heaven. Excella, very tall, is summed up by its Hindi name, Mahavriksha, the great tree. There are quite a few specimens in the golf club and along many roads. Its flowers, which come out late in February, are hardly visible, and its fruit, which drops by June, cannot be eaten. However, its soft wood is used for making packing cases and matchsticks. Some vultures seem to have a sense of history and like to rear their young in ancient buildings. A pair of neophrons has for years occupied the same niche in the western wall of the Bara Gumbad in Lodi Garden. As Englishmen make a fetish about hearing the first cuckoo in spring, I record the first time I hear the koel's full-throated cry rather than the half-hearted gurgles that one hears during winter months. In Delhi, their throats open up in the first week of March and get clearer as the days get warmer and as nesting season draws nearer. About the same time, the papiyas, hawk cuckoos, begin to announce their presence. Bird song can be heard round the clock. Crow pheasants, deep-throated hook, tree pies, harsh overture, followed by a tinkling of bells and golden orioles, brute mellifluous calls, can be heard every morning. On a warm afternoon, the coo-coo of coppersmiths, basanta, or the crimson-throated barbet sounds very much like the short blast made by the diesel-operated flour mills in villages. No songbird in India can match the magpie robin, shama or dayal. It usually sings only in the early hours of the morning or at twilight and evening. In March, the Lodi Gardens and the Buddha Jayanti Park are much frequented by picnickers. The Buddha Jayanti Park specializes in planting masses of the same flower for each bed. The Lodi Gardens has quite a few flowering trees and beads of pansies, phlox, salvias, violets, and other delicate varieties of flowers. A good time for visiting parks is the afternoon of Holi, after the coloured water sports are over and most people are tired or engaged in post-Holi feasting. In the Lodi Gardens, purple bougainvilleas, the most luxuriant and pristine variety of the species, make a splendid show. To be seen among the birds are owlets, sitting in holes of old walls, taking the sun with their eyes shut, and shrikes. You can generally spot the bay-backed and rufous shrikes on the lower branches of trees. The shrike is also known as the butcher bird because of its nasty habit of impaling live insects on thorns. In the last week of the month, spring vegetables and fruits flood the market. Cucumbers and kakris, tar, are on lunch menus. Watermelons, both cantaloupes and muskmelons, tarbooj and kharbuza, are available in the market. In recent years, their quality has improved. In my younger days, you had to be an expert to tell the sweet melons from the tasteless. One only bought kharbujas said to have come from Tonk or Saharanpur. Today, you have to be unlucky to bring home a flat-tasting melon. Most of them are sweet and succulent. Closely following on the heels of these earthy fruits come mulberries, both the white and the purple variety, mangoes from the south, and the much fancied Alfonso from the Konkan coast can be had for a price in fruit shops catering to the rich. But for locally grown varieties of this king of fruits, you have to wait for a few more weeks. Word meanings: unpredictable, likely to change suddenly without reason. Cast, throw away. Clout, piece of old clothing. Erratically, lacking regularly. Endowed with, born with a particular quality. Inclement, strong and unpleasant. Vagaries, unpredictable changes. Chancy, of uncertain outcome. Mock, to imitate. Doused, splashed with water. Foliage, cluster of leaves, cleft, split between two parts. Neoprons, small white vultures. Niche, a depression in a wall to hold something. Fetish, something you are always thinking about or spending too much time thinking. Gurgles, irregular bubbling sound. Overture, an introductory section or part. Mellifluous, having a pleasant and fluid sound. Pristine, clean and pure. Rufous, strong yellowish pink to moderate orange or reddish. Impaling, pierce with a sharp object. Succulent, full of juice. Withering of a tree. Get set, trees provide us with shade, flowers, greenery, oxygen, etc. They are a very important part of our environment. They take a long time to grow and hence should be protected. It takes much time to kill a tree. Not a simple jab of the knife will do it. It has grown, slowly consuming the earth, rising out of it, feeding upon its crust, absorbing years of sunlight, air, water, and out of its leprous hide sprouting leaves. So hack and chop, but this alone won't do it. Not so much pain will do it. The bleeding bark will heal, and from close to the ground will rise curled green twigs, miniature boughs, which if unchecked, will expand again to form a size. No, the root is to be pulled out of the anchoring earth. It is to be roped, tied and pulled out, snapped out or pulled out entirely, out from the earth cave, and the strength of the tree exposed, the source white and wet, the most sensitive hidden for years inside the earth. Then the matter of scorching and choking in sun and air, browning, hardening, twisting, withering, and then it is done. Word meanings: jab, a sudden hard hit with a pointed object. Crust, the outermost layer of the earth. Leprous, diseased, sprouting, appearing suddenly. Miniature, small, boughs, branches, anchoring, holding in position. Earth cave, large opening in the ground. Choking, making someone unable to breathe properly. Withering, shrinking and decaying. True friends. Get set. Think of a friend for whom you can do anything, and who can do anything for you. Sometimes animals and birds can be better friends than human beings. Let's read this story that brings out the beautiful relationship and understanding between a prince and a bird. Overlooking the city on a tall column stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes, he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on the hilt of his sword. "Why can't you be like the Happy Prince?" said a sensible mother to her little boy who was crying for the moon. "The Happy Prince never cries for anything."
"He looks just like an angel,"
said the school children as they walked past the statue in their bright scarlet coats and their clean white dresses. One night a little swallow flew over the city. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks ago, but he had stayed behind, for he was in love with the most beautiful reed.
"Shall I love you?"
said the swallow, who liked to come to the point at once, and the reed made him a low bow.
"This is a ridiculous attachment,"
said the other swallows. Then when autumn came, they all flew away. After they had gone, he felt lonely and began to tire of his lady love.
"Will you come away with me?"
he said finally to her, but the reed shook her head. She was so attached to her home.
"You have been trifling with me,"
he cried.
"I am off the pyramids. Goodbye."
And he flew away. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city.
"Where shall I stay?"
he said.
"I hope the town has made preparations."
Then he saw the statue on the tall column.
"I will stay there,"
he cried.
"It's a fine place, with plenty of fresh air. I have a golden bedroom,"
he said softly to himself. As he looked around, just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him.
"What a curious thing,"
he cried. Then another drop fell, and he decided to fly away. But before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up. He saw that the eyes of the Happy Prince were filled with tears, and the tears were running down his golden cheeks. The little swallow was filled with pity.
"Who are you?"
he asked.
"I am the Happy Prince." "Why are you weeping then?"
asked the swallow.
"When I was alive and had a human heart,"
answered the statue,
"I did not know about tears. I lived in the palace of Sansuki, where sorrow is not allowed to enter. Now they have placed me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. My heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep. Far away,"
continued the statue in a low musical voice.
"Far away in a little street, there is a poor woman's house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated at the table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse, red hands and all pricked by the needle, because she is seamstress. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. His mother has nothing to give him but water, so he is crying. Little swallow, will you not take her the ruby on the hilt of my sword? My friends are waiting for me in Egypt,"
said the swallow.
"Swallow, swallow, little swallow,"
said the prince,
"will you not stay with me for one night and be my messenger? The boy is so thirsty, and the mother so sad." "I don't think I like boys,"
answered the swallow.
"Last summer, near the river, there were 2 rude boys who were always throwing stones at me."
But the Happy Prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry.
"It is very cold here,"
he said,
"but I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger." "Thank you, little swallow,"
said the prince. So the swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it over the roofs of the town. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony. "I hope my dress will be ready in time for the dance," she said. "I have ordered flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy." At last he came to the poor woman's house and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother was so tired she had fallen asleep. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the boy's bed. Then he flew gently round the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings.
"How could I feel?"
said the boy.
"I must be getting better."
And he sank into a delicious slumber. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done.
"It is curious,"
he remarked,
"but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold." "That is because you have done a good deed,"
said the prince. When day broke, the swallow flew down to the river and had a bath.
"What a remarkable phenomenon,"
said the professor of ornithology as he was passing over the bridge.
"A swallow in winter."
And he wrote a long letter about it to the local newspaper. Everyone talked about it, thought it was full of words that they could not understand.
"Tonight I will go to Egypt,"
said the swallow, and he was in high spirits at the prospect. He visited all the public monuments and sat for a long time on top of the church steeple. Wherever he went, the sparrows chirruped and said to each other,
"What a distinguished stranger!"
So he enjoyed himself very much. When the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince.
"Have you any work that I can do for you in Egypt?"
he cried.
"I am just starting." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow,"
said the prince.
"far away across the city, I see a young man in the garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in a tumbler by his side there is a bunch of withered violets. He is trying to finish a play for the director of the theatre, but he is too cold to write any more. There is no fire in the garret, and hunger has made him faint. I will wait with you one night longer,"
said the swallow, who really had a good heart.
"Alas, I have no ruby now,"
said the prince.
"My eyes are all that I have left. They are made up of rare sapphires, which were brought from India 1,000 years ago. Pluck out one of them and take it to him." "Dear prince,"
said the swallow,
"I cannot do that."
and he began to weep.
"Swallow, swallow, little swallow,"
said the prince.
"do as I command you."
So the swallow plucked out one eye of the prince and flew away to the young man's garret. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings. When he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. The next day, the swallow flew down to the harbour.
"I am going to Egypt,"
he cried, but nobody minded, and when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince.
"I have come to bid you goodbye,"
he cried.
"Swallow, swallow, little swallow,"
said the prince.
"will you not stay with me one night longer?" "It is winter,"
answered the swallow,
"and the chill snow will soon be here. In Egypt, the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. Dear prince, I must leave you, but I will never forget you. Next spring, I will bring you 2 beautiful jewels in place of those you have given away. In the square below,"
said the happy prince,
"there stands a little match girl, selling matches. Her matches have fallen in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will scold her if she does not bring home some money, and she is crying. Pluck out my other eye, and give it to her, and her father will not scold her. I will stay with you one night longer, but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be completely blind then. Swallow, swallow, little swallow,"
said the prince.
"Do as I command you."
So he plucked out the prince's other eye and flew down with it. He swooped past the match girl. He dropped the jewel into the palm of her hand, and she ran home laughing. Then the swallow came back to the prince.
"You are blind now,"
he said.
"so I will stay with you always."
All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands.
"Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me the marvelous things, but more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and of women. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there."
So the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at the gates. Under a bridge, two little boys were lying in one another's arms to try and keep themselves warm. Then he flew back and told the prince what he had seen.
"I am covered with fine gold,"
said the prince.
"You must take it off, leaf by leaf, and give it the poor."
Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow gave to the poor, and the children's faces grew rosier, and they laughed and played games in the street. Then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore caps and skated on ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. Finally he knew that he was going to die. He had just enough strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more.
"Goodbye, dear prince,"
he murmured.
"I'm glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow,"
said the prince.
"It is not to Egypt that I am going,"
said the swallow.
"I am going to the house of death."
And he kissed the happy prince and fell down dead at his feet. At that moment a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. The fact is that the lead heart had snapped right in two. Early the next morning, the mayor was walking in the square below with the town councillors. As they passed the column, he looked up at the statue.
"How shabby the happy prince looks,"
he said.
"and there is actually a dead bird at his feet,"
continued the mayor.
"We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here."
So they pulled down the statue of the happy prince. Then they melted the statue in a furnace, and the mayor held a meeting to decide what was to be done with the metal.
"What a strange thing,"
said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry.
"This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace."
So they threw it on a dust heap, where the dead swallow was also lying.
"Bring me the two most precious things in the city,"
said God to one of his angels, and the angel brought him the lead heart and the dead bird.
"You have rightly chosen,"
said God,
"for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing for evermore, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me."
Word meanings: gilded, covered, sapphires, deep blue gemstones, hilt, handle, reed, stalk of a plant growing in marshy areas, trifling, treating lightly, sa, suchi, without worry, worn, tired because of too much work, seamstress, a woman who sews clothes, ornithology, branch of science that deals with birds, steeple, ornamental structure on top of a building, distinguished, dignified, garret, small room, councillors, members of a council, proclamation, public announcement, foundry, factory for processing metals, King Lear. Get set. Have you ever thought about how much effort your parents have made for you? Are you able to repay that with your actions and expressions of love and affection? Should parents differentiate between their children? An excellent example of differentiating between children and making wrong judgments about them is shown in the famous play about King Lear. Read an extract from the play. Lear, the old king of Britain, decides to give up his crown. He declares his intention of dividing his kingdom equally among his 3 daughters. However, before he allots the portions of the kingdoms to his daughters, he puts his daughters through a test. He asks each daughter to tell him how much she loves him, telling them that what they receive from him will depend on the answers they give. Let us read and find out what the daughters say and how Leah rewards them. Give me the map there. Know that we have divided in three our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we unburdened crawl towards death. Our son of Cornwall, and you, our no less loving son of Albany, we have this hour a constant will to publish our daughters' several dowers, that future strife may be prevented now. Tell me, my daughters, interest of territory, cares of state, which of you shall we say doth love us most, that we our largest bounty may extend, where nature doth with merit challenge. Goneril, our eldest born, speak first. As much as child e'er loved, or father found, a love that makes breath poor and speech unable, beyond all manner of so much I love you. Cordelia aside, what shall Cordelia do, love and be silent? Leah, of all these bounds, even from this line to this, with plenteous rivers and wide-skirted meads, we make thee lady to thine and Albany's issue. Be this perpetual. What says our second daughter, our dearest Regan, wife to Cornwall? Speak. Sir, I am made of the same self-metal that my sister is, only she comes too short, that I profess myself an enemy to all other joys, which the most precious square of sense possesses, and find I am alone felicitate in your dear Highness's love. Aside, then, poor Cordelia, and yet not so, since I'm sure my love's more richer than my tongue. To thee and thine, hereditary, ever remain this ample third of our fair kingdom, than that conferred on Goneril. Now our joy, Cordelia, what can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters? Speak. Nothing, my lord. Nothing? Nothing. Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again. Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, nor more nor less. How, Cordelia, mend your speech a little, lest it may mar your fortunes. You have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as are right fit, obey you, love you, and most honour you. But goes thy heart with this? Ay, good my lord. Let it be so, thy truth, then be thy dower, for by the sacred radiance of the sun, the mysteries of Hecate and the night, here I disclaim all my parental care, propinquity, and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this for ever. Good my liege, King Lear, peace, Kent, come not between the dragon and his wrath. I loved her most, and thought to set my rest on her kind nursery, hence, and avoid my sight. So be my grave, my peace, as here I give her father's heart from her, Cornwall and Albany, with my two daughters' dowers digest this third. Royal Lear, whom I have ever honoured as my king, as my great patron, thought on in my prayers. The bow is bent and drawn, make from the shaft. Let it fall rather, though the fork invade the region of my heart, be Kent unmannerly. When Lear is mad, what wilt thou do, old man? Thinkest thou that duty shall have dread to speak? When power to flattery bows, to plainness honour's bound, when majesty stoops to folly, reverse thy doom, and in thy best consideration check this hideous rashness Answer my life, my judgment. Thy youngest daughter does not love thee least. Kent, on my life, no more. My life I never held but as a pawn, to wage against thy enemies, nor fear to lose it, thy safety being the motive. Out of my sight, see better, Lear, and let me still remain, the true blank of thine eyes. O vassal, miscreant, laying his hand on his sword, dear sir, forbear, do, or whilst I can vent clamour from my throat, I'll tell thee thou dost evil. Hear me, recreant, since thou hast sought to make us break our vow, which we durst never yet, and with strained pride to come between our sentence and our power, which nor our nature nor our place can bear, our potency made good. Take thy reward, 5 days we do allot thee for provision to shield thee from diseases of the world, and on the 6th to turn thy hated back upon our kingdom, if on the 10th day following thy banished trunk be found in our dominions, the moment is thy death. Away, by Jupiter! Fare thee well, king, sith thus thou wilt appear. Freedom lives hence, and banishment is here. To Cordelia, the gods to their dear shelter take thee, maid, that justly thinkest, and hast most rightly said. To Regan and Goneril, and your large speeches may your deeds approve, that good effects may spring from words of love. After Kent is banished, Lear calls the King of France and the Duke of Burgundy to court. They both want to marry Cordelia, but Burgundy refuses when he hears that Cordelia will not get any part of the kingdom. The King of France, however, is convinced that Cordelia is a good person and decides to marry her and make her the Queen of France. After Cordelia departs with the King of France, Lear declares that he will spend half the year in Goneril's palace and half in Regan's. He starts to spend his days at each palace with a group of servants. Kent, disguised as a servant, also joins him. Lear soon realizes that his daughters do not want him. He is treated cruelly by both Goneril and Regan. He realizes that all the statements they had made about loving and respecting him were untrue. Driven mad by his anger and grief, he runs away into the wild, followed by Kent. Meanwhile, the King of France prepares to invade Lear's kingdom, which is now ruled by Goneril and Regan. Kent sends a message to Cordelia, telling her of Lear's condition. Cordelia finally finds Lear, who asks her to forgive him for having been so cruel. However, Cordelia and Lear are captured. When the French armies are defeated, Goneril and Regan give orders for Lear and Cordelia to be killed. Kent and the others manage to rescue Lear, but Cordelia dies. Lear, unable to bear the pain of Cordelia's death, dies at the end of the play. Word meanings: conferring, giving as an honor gift, unburthened, without any burden, publish, make public, bounty, reward, meads, meadows, issue, child, perpetual, forever, metal, temperament, profess, declare openly, felicitate, feel happy, hereditary, future generations, ample, sufficient, opulent, wealthy, mar, spoil, fortunes, wealth or riches, begot, fathered, dower, gift, Hecate, goddess of magic, propinquity, nearness, hence, here, from here, patron, supporter, doom, unfavorable judgment, wage, carry on the fight, forbear, hold back, bent, give expression, clamour, loud uproar, recreant, unfaithful, disloyal person, sought, tried to find, durst, dare, potency, strength, dominions, areas ruled, sith, since. Black. Get set. These days you see colour films, but there was a time when films were made black and white. In this poem, the poet has tried to recreate the images of black and white films. Late at night, one of us sometimes has said, watching a movie in black and white, of the vivid figures quick upon the screen. Surely by now all of them are dead. The yapping, wire-haired terrier, of course, and the patient horse soaked in an illusion of London rain. The Scotland Yard inspector at the scene, the extras, faces in the crowd, the sailors, the bungling blackmailers, the kidnapped girl's parents, reunited again, ignorant of so many things we know, how they seem innocent, and yet they too possess a knowledge that they cannot give. We wonder briefly only about the girl. How old? 7, 12? It isn't clear. Perhaps she's still alive, watching this somewhere at 8-5. The only one who knows, though we might guess, what the kidnapper whispers in her ear, or the colour of her dress. Word meanings. Vivid, strikingly bright. Terrier, a small active type of dog that was originally used for hunting. Illusion. Produce a false impression. Bungling, clumsy.